you're not going to be able to drink the public water. There's no way that you can purify this out of it, the imprint of it, right? Let's just talk about the imprint. You're not going to be able to purify the imprint out of that water, right? You're not going to be able to drink that water because of the radiation levels. You're not going to be able to bathe in it.
Yeah, basically.
God forbid, you breathe the steam out of it. And the other thing is, too, is you're not going to be able to cook with it or use it or, do any of that kind of stuff with it. So it's horrifying. You know what I mean? Like, chemtrails are super bad. They're destroying the earth, but they just one-upped it.
Yeah.
Into complete population destruction. Like, we are in mass kill, population destruction, and whoever survives is going to be under serious influence. Like, they're going to think that they're ascending. They're going to think they're seeing all kinds of stuff, and it's going to be a projected, because ascension is no different than the Bible. The Bible was created by Rome. There's totally history on this, that they created it to control the populations, especially the pagan people.
Before you get into that and get down the Bible road, we have a person in our audience who'd like to ask you a question. So I'd like to bring Karen on. Karen, welcome to The New Way.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to ask a question. And Bridgette, is that how you say your name?
No, I'm Bridgette, just Bridgette, but I use Bridgette, so that's...
Oh, Bridgette, I am blown away by everything you're saying. I want to ask a question from a social worker standpoint. I'm glad that you found a psychologist at one point in time that was thinking outside of the box. I have never subscribed to the idea of pathologizing people. And every time I meet a new person as a social worker, I clear the slate in my brain and I keep myself like completely open-minded, and I'm constantly considering 4 main domains of factors that could be influencing what's going on with this person, their problem, and in terms of, understanding them so that I can best help them achieve their goal. And those are biological, psychological, social, and spiritual functioning. And so I guess my question is, there's all of this diagnoses of, schizophrenia. And from early on, when I was at University of Pennsylvania, we learned to define people by the functional approach. We don't call people schizophrenics, but this is a person who's currently experiencing paranoia, or they have delusions that it's, of the bizarre kind that it's difficult to prove whether what they're reporting is actually factual. And so I like that, because I think it's a disservice, because I think people, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy if you're just like labeled schizophrenic or, depressed person or whatever. And it's almost like it imposes upon them. And I guess like my question is that as I work with people, really listening to you, I am really getting the point that there's metallics in our system. There is, this 5G stuff, even the microwave stuff that you added. I'm wondering, the root of psychiatry, and it's all as diagnosed and stuff like that, does it even actually exist? Because I'm now inclined to think that our functioning is in direct proportion to our environment. And that environment is a reality that's defined. It's a social construct from a force. Well, I don't know if it's a force bigger. I mean, we maybe individually can become a bigger force. I'm not sure. But I just would love to see your insights on psychiatry and how quote unquote crazy people fit into this whole spectrum of, microwave 5G, food that's not organic, and all the chemicals that we obviously are increasingly becoming exposed to. Because, not only is it an injustice to label people and pathologize them, but, for me as a social worker, it's really important to understand this aspect, because I can't really help people if I don't really know everything that's influencing their behavior. And I guess these chemical things would be probably under the domain of biological or physical factors. But then this whole concept of being aware, I think, is under the spiritual factor. And so I just would love, I don't know that I'm asking you a specific question. I just want your input and thoughts and how you weigh, or how do you integrate psychiatry and crazy people and into this whole knowledge base that you have, because oh my gosh, you're profound. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Well, I'm really proud of you for asking a lot of questions and actually thinking out of the box. That's really big, especially when you've been through the university, especially clinical, because of the thought processes that they impose, and then you get out of clinic and you start to realize nothing that they've really given you is really helping. So I applaud you considerably and elevate you. So keep keep learning and exploring. So there's quite a few things. The first thing I want to tell people is that I just want to tell people that if you can get a hold of me by emailing me at consciousnessofelconomics@gmail.com. I have a YouTube channel, Consciousness of Economics and Urban Farm Project. You can find me on Facebook at Bridgette Lyn Dolgoff. And I do lots of long distance sessions with people. I do certain kinds of life coaching, nutritional work, healthcare work, and all kinds of different work to try to help people to understand. And I love working with people who are in the settings to help them expand and explore, to be able to help more people. Okay, so there's a few things there. Diet, obviously, if we're eating a really poor diet and we're getting codes into our system that are part of, the AI that they're generating, GMO foods have their own codes, and obviously those would be putting codes into our body, into our genetics and our DNA that could damage, our mind and our abilities to actually think and run our own programming. The other thing too is there's a lot of parasitic stuff that is in the food. They found that, I read a study that, they looked at, beef patties from McDonald's. They found that 11% of the McDonald's burger meat was human, the rest was horse, and that there was a huge amount of certain types of parasites in it. So you can look at any kind of scientific studies. There's studies with, cats and mice, and that how mice, play these games because they do things because they have a parasite in them. And normally mice would not want to be around cats at all, and they would run away. But when mice get this certain kind of parasite and it overwrites their brain, they want to get killed by the cat because the cat needs to ingest the parasite so the parasite can move to another level. So there's also a lot of different kinds of parasitic stuff that can be in our food, especially in fish and different things like that. And especially when animals are not healthy, or meat products and stuff are not treated, with really good health standards, they get high amounts of parasites in them. And some of these parasites can't be really cooked out. So those things can actually start to take over the body, and they can take over the brain. And so sometimes people can need some, anti-parasitic treatments, and maybe to get off meat and dairy for a while, work with a raw food or a vegan diet, and then, take some anti-parasitic medications, which you can find alternative stuff for that, in order to try to get their systems back in control. There's also nutritional deficiencies. For example, vitamin B12. In Poland, they did a whole bunch of studies where they found that people actually could go mentally insane because of the lack of vitamin B, because it coats the actual nervous systems. So if there's no coating on the nerves, then everything's raw, right? And people can have chemical sensitivity. They can have, light sensitivity. They can have a lot of that stuff affects them emotionally. They're overly sensitive to the outside world because they're lacking a huge amount of vitamin B12. And what they found was in Poland, they had a whole, for a while, I don't know, it was like the 50s or 60s, they had a whole bunch of people going into a coma. So without B12, you can actually go into like total insanity. And then, because it's a bacteria, right? So all forms of, you can't really take, this is why they're eliminating out of the medical system B12 shots, because B vitamins are bacterias, and those bacterias need to be in our systems in order to help defend us from what's, like parasites and other bacterias and things like that. So when we become vitamin, 12 depleted, it's kind of essential if people are mentally unstable that they start getting regular, B12 injections. And there was a guy that I watched his study, and he showed that when they injected, they used one of those hypothermal cameras, right, that are, not going to destroy your DNA or anything, but they show the body as an energy field and the heat and the cool sections. And they showed that when they injected the vitamin B12 into the body, especially into somebody who was super, super depleted, the spine actually would suck it up at the base immediately and run it up the cerebral fluid to the brain. So you can start to see like the power of the brain needing that B12, in order to actually neutralize, hypersensitivity that's going on in the environment of the person. So those play a huge role. There's a couple other things too. In shamanism, okay, so we talked about also fungus can override the system, and there's a lot of weird funguses in the chemtrails. And Dane Wigington, who's a really good friend of mine, he's like the world's authority right now on chemtrails, and he has a website called geoengineeringwatch.org, and they have a lot of proof, scientific data that shows what is in the chemtrails. And what is being, laid out on the population. And one of the things is fungus. And fungus can actually, in the negative, can override the system. If you don't have the microbes in your gut and microbes in your system from eating from the earth and being involved in dirt and, all the other, animal poo-poo on farms and stuff like that, and then you don't have enough bacteria in your system, which B12 and the other B-type vitamins are bacteria. Supplements are not bacteria. You cannot take a dry B supplement and get vitamin Bs. It's non-biological. You have to eat food that actually has bacteria on it, which means that you grew it in your yard and it hasn't been washed 800 million times until everything is washed off of it, right? So plants will grow natural types of bacteria. It's one of the things I do is farming, and I try to get some of my clients to grow at least 25% of their food supply annually in their yard because they need that bacteria on that food, and they need the vitamins that is in the food. Let's see. So the other thing too is like in shamanism or medicine, medicine people. So we have shamanism or shamans that come from Siberia, the Russian area. That's where my family and my lineages come from. Then you have like a really good friend of mine and business partner, Muwanji Hassan. He's in Africa, and he, does a lot of the traditional African medicine arts. And then you have medicine people in the Americas, and then, in South America, they would have been more like shaman or sorcerers and things like that. So all these terms apply to the same kind of people doing the same kind of work. It's just they're in different areas, right? But one of the things that they talk about is that when we are disconnected from our ancestors, like we move far away from where our ancestors were. We move away from the water vibration that we were born in. We move away from, eating the cultural foods And all these things start to break us down to where we can't listen, we can't feel. And then our ancestors, which are the water in our area, the food, the cultural foods, all these different things are part of the ancestry, including, our family heritages. And so when we move further away from that, this is where they say that schizophrenia comes from, and bipolar disorder is a disconnection basically with your original culture, because you need that original culture because of the influences that are already in your system. So you need that to influence, the health and your mental health and your future health. So one of the interesting things with, Mwangi Hassan is he's trying to start in Africa, in Uganda, he's trying to start a school where kids would learn how to read and write, but they would also learn these ancient culture practices and spiritual practices would be developed in them. And then they would keep them in the communities to fix and rebuild the communities, because a lot of the African children are trying to leave. They get through a certain amount of school and they're trying to go to college in other countries. And ultimately, when they come back, if they do come back, they have a lot of problems. They have a lot of psychological problems and all kinds of stuff. So Mwangi Hassan is starting to try to create programs where they keep them in the community and they teach them things and trades and education, and so that their children can fix the cultural problems and the destruction of the cultural problems to kind of help heal the spiritual illnesses that they're finding. So lastly, hereditary, stuff plays into what's going on, and especially in America. We're like 5 generations into really bad hereditary stuff. So say, for example, a person is put in war. We'll just say World War I. And, our grandfathers went off and they fought these wars and they came back and then they reproduced children with, the mother. Well, the next offspring is probably going to be more characteristic in the males. But now you've got a generation after that is carrying a lot of the damage, emotional damage to the DNA. So whenever you get a vaccine, it actually creates a spur on your DNA. And so your DNA will constantly replicate itself with that spur on there, right? Replicate your body with the disease, right? As if you had that disease and you survived that disease. Well, you can also have emotional imprinting that affects the DNA. And so when it gets passed down, after the event has happened or the mind control has happened or the violence has happened or whatever else, now when the next offspring comes, now there's this, hook, is what I call a hook, on the DNA that actually now is hereditary in the next evolution. And it keeps being hereditary as it's passed down. And so the violence, the fear, whatever else is being passed down, and it's nonverbal. In a lot of the Native teaching work that I've done to learn a lot of Native American energy medicine skills, my teacher told me that, we hold 7 generations in our gut of our father's side, and we hold 7 generations of our mother's side in our gut. And it's all nonverbal. We don't know what it is. We don't know what they went through. We don't know what was hereditary passed down. Recently, I just found out what 7 generations means. I thought maybe, 80 years per generation. And it actually turns out that it's 500 years per generation, because when this system in Native people was established, people lived to 500 years old. So 7 generations on either side goes back 3,500 years in each person, right? And so we have to try to overcome a lot of these systems that are operating, that are inside of ourselves. By the time of 5th generation hits, after, let's say, World War I, the males, now you've got 5 generations where these imprints are hereditary, and how those hereditary imprints are playing out, and how crazier and crazier and crazier these people are getting. So there's like huge amounts, of levels of this kind of stuff. And then, I was thinking about this recently, a lot of with the satanic stuff and the mind control stuff. I have quite a few friends that were MK Ultra, and they were like actually, established in programs at 6 years old to fracture, their personalities to get them to do work, and they used sexual abuse, starvation, physical abuse, psychological abuse. They've used all kinds of things on people. And I don't know how far MK Ultra goes back to in the US. But think about this. Think about you have a father or a mother, and I know this because my mom was handled, and my mom was married by a wealthy guy from the East Coast when she was 18, and my mom thought she was getting a happy ever after, and it turned out to be a government handler because I come from special lineages, and he put her in a mental hospital in 1959. Because your husband could do that and your family could do that, and for no reason. And she was given electroshock therapy, she was raped, and she was drugged, and she was completely destroyed as a human being. And so I never knew her beforehand, and it was something like, 10 years later, she ended up getting pregnant with me and having me. And me having to, go down a psychological path to try to figure out what was wrong with me, why I didn't have this relationship with my mom, even though I could see she was magical, the things that she could do were unbelievable. But it was because, she had been handled by the system. And so me and my sister were first hereditary generation after that happened. So there was this stuff in me from early childhood that people were going to kidnap me, people were going to try to kill me, which, they have, but it was more so psychological because it had happened to her. And so I didn't know until after 5 years after she died, so this would have been like 2004, that this had happened to her, right? And it explained everything. Once it came out, I looked at my grandmother and I said, could anybody told us this earlier? I wouldn't have spent 15 years in psychotherapy, right? I would have gotten it. I wouldn't be trying to figure out why I have all this paranoia, why I have all this fear, why I don't trust people, why I really don't trust the medical system, why I really don't trust telling people things, why I have a really hard time connecting with people. So you could see how this could play out in your genetics because it would be attached to your genetics. But through a lot of the energy medicine practices I've learned, like with my medicine teacher, Lakota Sioux medicine woman, when I was 23, worked with her for a year, she said, it is our job to clear for the future generations the past generation stuff that's held within our system. So there are ways, if we keep with it and keep with people as they make the journey, that they can actually heal those things on an energetic level, and that they can actually free themselves, but then also free the past generations, and then free the future generations, even if their future generations, like I haven't had children, but other, members of my family have. So I'm freeing those children, right? I'm freeing their generations forward by doing the work that I'm doing, to free myself of the mental hereditary complications that can happen to people that in the past. So those are just kind of like maybe some thoughts that I think about, whenever I'm dealing with somebody who I can tell is, that sets up a session with me, and I can tell that they're extremely, bipolar, or they're extremely like schizophrenic, or they're extremely, unstable. Is, I try to find like physical things that they can focus in on, or practices. Like, number one, they're not going to ever be able to meditate because the mental chaos is so severe, and it's running at their body because it's a genetic thing. It could be hereditary. So you have to find things like to override that. like just simple things like changing up the routine in the morning, or asking them to start eating with the opposite hand. So if you always are picking up the fork and spoon in your right hand, let's just try for 30 days and just see what happens. Every time you pick up a silverware to eat, use your left hand, just to change how the brain works, right? And just to see what's going to happen, because now we have a focus of attention and we have an intention of eating, with a different hand, and seeing how that goes. I mean, sometimes it's like the simplest things that we can focus in on that can make the biggest changes in people's lives, because now, hereditarily people were trained to eat with their right hand because the left hand was considered evil. So how many generations does that go back? That goes back superstition for at least 2,000 years, right? In some cultures, you can only eat with, I think, your right hand because you wipe your butt with your left hand. So that even goes back further and further and further. And so just these simple little mind control things that are hereditary and that your family forces you because they don't know why into using your right hand. Sometimes the simplest things of maybe even just changing how people eat, giving them an idea about that, even if it seems so simple, but it's thousands and thousands of years of mind control practice, right? Established practice that's in us, regardless of where we know it comes from or why, but it's been established in us as a form of control because the people who are teaching us, that's how they were controlled, right? So nobody really asks a lot of these questions. So sometimes the simplest things can really alter how people are going to navigate and how that could actually open up, because it goes against the actual control systems and even the DNA in the body, because if you start to think about, oh yeah, I'm going to eat with the left hand. Oh, I was eating with my right hand. Oh, I better eat with the left hand. So it creates a focus of attention, and to see what happens. And I always tell people, give it at least 30 days. I would like you to do this one thing for 90 days, but let's get through 30 days and see what happens, right? And then go from there. And then listen to them and see, if they did get anything from it or they did realize something, because sometimes it's the simplest things that can really change people for the better. So anyway, I hope that gave you a whole bunch of information on some other ideas to kind of look at. And I'm sure that people are going to be even going more Richter as 5G gets established and it starts crossing the country, state to state. And I think people are going to get, way more nuttier. And 5G is just, something that we really have to really take into consideration, across the board in all kinds of healthcare fields. And that, we really have to, fight for the people who don't understand it, and help them to understand what's going on, and really try to communicate with the establishment as well, in a, non-aggressive way that gets you fired, because, if you get fired, then you can't really help the system, can you?
Zombie apocalypse. Maybe we don't want to help the system. Maybe we just want to withdraw from it. Find other ways of doing things.
Right, but if you're a social worker, like she was asking questions.
True.
It's going to be really important for her to stay in the system and try to figure out how to bridge, to help the people who need the help, because otherwise they're just going to get somebody else who doesn't really give a rat's poop about them and is going to box them in, which is not going to be helpful for them at all.
Karen?
You literally just articulated my conundrum. Thank you. That's it.
Yeah, hang in there, girl. I've been working with people and systems for a long, long time, and it's only been recently that I call what I do, I'm a healthcare practitioner. And one of the things that I've found, I tried to fight the system for so long, but one of the niches I found is, I'm dealing with people worldwide with the medical field now. And people set up appointments with me on Zoom meeting, and I basically am going through baseline stuff with them. What kind of medications are you on? What kind of symptoms do you think you're having?